benefit. And this is something that I kind of was um, coming to terms with like myself, like recently a little bit, and trying to further my understanding of the faith and the logic behind it all. I think it only makes sense if you look at it that it's for our benefit. Like, God is perfect. He didn't need us. And so therefore it has to be for our benefit. And in the Christian worldview, that makes sense because like if you could be reunited with God, there could be nothing really greater than that.
Well, then you
Like
have to be
greater
a
than.
universalist Christian.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, if you're saying it's for our benefit, given that we know throughout history many people have suffered terribly and then they die, and if you take the Christian worldview of eternal conscious torment, they will suffering will only get worse after they die. So, but if you're a universalist, you can bypass all this and say, okay, yeah, you suffered here on planet Earth, you were raped, you died of malnutrition, these horrible things, but don't you worry, you'll be rewarded in the afterlife, whether you believe in God or not, because God is going to make everything right. But if,
Oh, right.
yeah, so if you're not a
Yeah.
universalist, you're in big trouble.
Well, I mean, I guess that's true on a certain level. I see what you're saying there. I mean, my only objection with that would be that see there seems to be like a rub no matter which way the answer comes out. Whatever, let's say assuming like let's just pretend for the sake of argument that the Christian theism is true, which I know most people, on your channel don't follow, but assuming it is, it's either people are going to be held accountable or they're not. And it's either so like as the way you just described it, yeah, sure, the person who, like, in other words, you could come up with these different hypotheticals, but ultimately, like, is there going to be accountability or is there not going to be? And like where is that line drawn? You're always going to be able to point to some example and be like, no, this person, because something bad happened to them, they handled it a certain way, and maybe that's like that, maybe that was their own fault. I mean, I hate to say it, I've like suffered a lot in my life through my own fault. Like I can't blame that on exterior things. Like I have to take accountability
But,
for all
well,
the.
in a way you can blame God.
Yeah, you can, but I mean, like, I guess why? I mean, but isn't that just skirting responsibility? Like, you could just
You're
blame.
responsible for what's in your control, right?
Yeah,
Was your birth in your control? Was your creation in your
no,
control? No.
no.
So in that sense, you can blame God that he created you, number one, and number two, he created you knowing with 100% certainty the bad things that people do to you and the bad choices you yourself make that you're responsible for. All that could have
Yeah.
been avoided if God just never created you.
Yeah, it could, right? But I think like embedded in that concept is the notion that we can rise above, that like no matter what happens to us, like we have the capability to rise above it. And if we didn't, like if our capabilities were of such a degree that like
But so what
it's
about rising above? Like you're still suffering on planet Earth, and if you're not a universalist, you're still going to face some type of judgment in the afterlife. Why not just if I were God, I wouldn't have created anything.
I mean, but see, wouldn't that be limiting in the sense that like if you didn't, then it would almost be like kind of selfish of you not to, because like
I'm
you would
God. Why is that selfish to choose not to create anything?
because you would then be denying like the gift of like happiness, essentially. Not
You
just
you can't
not
deny anything to something that doesn't exist. You're
well.
you're only denying after existence.
Let's assume for the sake of argument, right, that like the person was going to be happy and and their parents were like, I'm just not going to have them because I don't want to deal with like a bratty kid and the expense of having a children. Like if that was their sole motivation, just being like, I don't feel like taking on the burden of having a kid,
Hmm.
even though they knew like my kid is going to be successful, happy, rewarded, he's going to live an excellent life. I think it would be hard to justify that. Someone would be like,
No,
when you
it's easy because that kid would never realize that they were not created.
yeah, they wouldn't, but I guess like, but then, but that kind of just like, I guess the question is like, can you zoom back? Can you zoom out? And when, and like, in any time you're making a decision, like, is the impact of the decision just like the immediate consequence, or are there broader implications, like to,
The
on
reason why
a,
most humans procreate is because of selfishness. I had kids because
yes,
I'm a selfish human being. We all are. I wanted to look at my life vicariously through my children. I wanted the hope, meaning, and purpose that children can give. If God, from my understanding of the Christian God, God's not selfish. He doesn't need
right.
to vicariously live through us. He doesn't need us. He doesn't need
No.
hope, meaning, and purpose. I mean, the fact that we exist is strong evidence that your God, the Christian God, doesn't.
No, I would say it's the opposite, because like, I think the strongest argument for God existing is that he is the explanation for why anything exists at all, or else you're just left with just it exists inexplicably without any explanation, because
Okay,
under
yeah,
that.
I agree that that is a way to go, but I'm being very specific with the Christian God right now,
Oh,
who
right,
is,
right.
has attributes of all good, all loving, doesn't like sin, not an ounce of it. Like if you believe in that type of God who can see the future, has free will, all powerful, if you believe in that type of God, then the fact
Yeah,
that we exist, that the earth exists like it does, is evidence against that God. This is the real problem of evil. Now, if you want
right.
to believe in a God who just creates things and is an explanation of why things exist and then just sits back and says, look what happened down there, then okay, fine. If that makes you sleep better at night, then believe in that God. I don't care.
No, well, but let's say, like, let's bring it back to your example, like when you were saying like why you chose to have kids, and I agree with you. Like 99% of the people do it for selfish reasons, but once you had them, and you experienced like the joy of having your kids and loving your kids, then at that point, and if you knew like my kid is going to get what he wants out of life, like he's not going to suffer and experience like the, I mean, we all experience like the difficulties of life. I'm oversimplifying it, but
Yeah, then it's
what I'm
worth
trying
it.
to,
I agree with you.
yeah, like, so right, like you would do it because you'd be like, I'm giving them like the opportunity of like the of experiencing life, and like, even though personally, like ironically, I had a girlfriend for a long time, and I never wanted kids because I always feared something bad would happen to them.
All
So it's
right.
like really ironic. I'm
But
taking this.
we're talking about a God who doesn't just fear that something bad will happen to people. He knows it if you believe in an omniscient
Yeah.
God. Now, you can be an open theist, but there's ways around this. But imagine I have going to have 5 kids. I plan to have 5 kids. And I know with 100% certainty one will live to the age of 40, but have some type of disease that every day of their life is in pain, severe pain. Or you can imagine this one will grow up to be a serial killer and kill hundreds of other people. You name it, something really bad about that one kid. And here's my choice: I can either have the one kid and 4 average kids who are average people in society, or none. Okay.
Right.
Now, me as a selfish human being, I might go, okay, I'll have the 5 kids, even though knowing that one is going to be really, really bad or really, really painful. But I still got the other 4. But when you view this from God's perspective of not being needy, not being selfish, this God saying, I really hate sin. I don't need these 4 because I'm content. So I'm going to have 0,
Right.
right?
Well, I would agree with that if the analysis ended, if when you're weighing the costs and the benefits, like it stopped at like what is the impact like on this planet, and it's like because then you would basically say like ultimately like it's hard to justify the suffering, no matter how much good there was. It would be very hard to justify it, because the stuff you could just easily say like, look, there's an equal amount of suffering, if not more, because we're just biological creatures, and so we have illness, and we're so subject to pain and suffering. Like, even if there was no moral harm, there would still be all like the physical harms that we would experience. But I guess the way that the Christian explanation gets around that is by basically saying like this is just like the first chapter in the story, and that you get the joy of the afterlife,
That gets
which
me
is
back to universalism. You have to be a universalist then if you want to stay a Christian.
no, but, like, I don't think you have to be a universalist because, like, doesn't that just sort of assume that, like, it's somehow, like, the scales aren't tipped enough unless everyone gets into the like, why does every single person have to get into the afterlife to in order
Okay,
for
then you have to be prepared to say that this God created people knowing with 100% certainty that some will go to hell, and he said, "I'm okay with it."
Yeah, I don't think he's okay with it.
Sure,
I
he's okay
think
with it because he created it. He could have chose not to. He
well,
desired to create a universe where he knew with 100% certainty some people will go to hell,
yeah.
right?
Well, but
You're
in
done
other
at
words, like,
that point.
I guess the way I would put it is, like, he was okay okay with it makes it sound like he's condoning it versus, like, he's
He
willing to.
condones it in the sense that he created, knowing with 100% certainty it will happen. And if he doesn't create it, it won't happen.
Yes, but I think that but just because you have knowledge of something, that doesn't mean that you brought it about, like, it's still, like, because
He
otherwise
brought
the
it about
alternative.
because he created, knowing with 100% certainty it will happen. This is why there's Molinists. They realize what I'm saying is true, so they try every way to get around it. This is why there's open theists, because they know what I'm saying is true, and they try every way to get around it. They say things like, well, God really didn't know the future because the future doesn't exist yet. And he couldn't even really predict it because, I mean, I mean, and then the Mullins say, well, those choices are coexistence with God eternally past. So even though God came first and created everything, somehow these choices, I mean, God knew what was going to happen. And if you are going to remain a Christian, you have to say, yes, God saw that Doug would reject him. God saw that when he dies, he'll go to hell. And yes, God created Doug anyhow. That is a huge problem.
Yeah, it is, but the alternative would be because
The
I
alternative is
agree.
non-existence. And
Yeah, exactly. Non-existence or existence where we're like robots, which would be like, what would be, there would be no point of that at all.
you, you make it sound like it, this existence just has to be. I mean, no. If you're a god of the universe and you have a choice to make to create or not to create,
Yeah.
and by the way, this is another way Christians get around this. They know what I'm saying is true, so they'll just say God had no free will in it. He was forced, he was compelled to create. He was kind of like, okay, I gotta do it. I gotta close my eyes. I know what's gonna happen. This is gonna be a
No,
train
no,
wreck.
no.
But no, some people say God's nature is one of creation, so he had to create. He had no choice. I mean, it's ridiculous the lengths
Yeah,
that theists go through to solve the real problem of evil. But
yeah,
what they end up doing is they make God a little bit more like me and you, a schmuck, selfish, needy, not can't see the future, is not all powerful. It has some like I need to express my love. It's ridiculous.
right. Well, I get, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think part of that is just because they haven't either fully thought out the implications of what they're saying, or they're just
See,
misguided and come
I
up with it.
get you, Baked Alaska. I get you. I know what you're saying. You're looking at the world around you and you're saying, we exist, we're here. Now
Yeah.
I gotta explain this. I gotta consolidate, reconcile somehow how this God in my head can be X, Y, and Z. And yet I see all the pain and suffering, I see judgment, I see all these things. How do I fit this all together? Well, there's an easy
Exactly.
answer. Your God doesn't exist.
Well, that could be one answer for sure. I agree with that. What I struggle with is and I don't like to use the term atheist like a label like that, but why folks who don't believe, it seems like, um the part that I struggle with is like there seems to be a way of reconciling it that's at least rational. You might not say like it's convincing, um, but it's at least rational, and there seems to be like a reward in like, maybe it takes a leap of faith, like, no pun intended, but there's a benefit of that approach versus the other approach where, like, I don't see what the benefit is of just, other than just like saying like I'm committed to truth and this is the only thing,
The
like,
benefit
this
is
cardinal.
lower cognitive dissonance. I don't have to try to piece it together like you do. I don't have to
Right,
say,
right.
why is this suffering here on planet Earth? I don't have to piece together how can an omniscient, all knowing, all powerful, all loving God create such a universe like this. I don't have to piece it together. I just, no,
Yeah.
it's, it's vastly more plausible that this God is a creation of men rather than it creating men.
I mean, but don't you want to be able to be reconnected with your loved ones like upon death?
Maybe for a time, but no, not really. I don't want to live forever. If it means I have to live forever and ever and ever, no.
Yeah.
I want the party to stop at some point.
what would what would be the purpose of that? I mean, once the party ends, like it's like you're wiped into oblivion. It's like you never even existed. To
Yes.
me, that's there's no more frightening of a
Why does
thought
non-existence frighten you?
because it's all we have. Like the only thing we have is our
Yeah, but when you
consciousness.
don't have it, you're not worried about it.
True, true. It's I think it's just the annihilation of self. Like it's just a scary
You're too
idea that
selfish, Baked Alaska.
might
You
be.
value your own existence. Like 2,000 years ago, you did not exist, right?
Right.
Were you worried about that?
No, no,
Were you sad about that?
no, not at all.
Did you go on live streams to talk about it?
No.
I saying I wish I existed? No. There's nothing wrong with non-existence. There's nothing right about non-existence. It's just non-existence.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, there is a certain like peace to non-existence. Um, you know, like, and I've thought of that because I as much as I tend to call myself a theist, like, I still obviously like I think like almost 99% of people like I don't know, and I wonder like it's very likely that when I die, like that's going to be the end of the story. It's I think maybe in part because our lives are so short and like maybe if we lived 500 years or 1,000 years, maybe I would feel different. It's just like it feels like it's a really
That day
short
might
time.
come.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
There's the transhumanist movement and trying to get humans to live forever.
Well, I mean, look, going back to what we were saying earlier, like you don't think it's sufficient to say like, look, if you're gonna make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. Like there was just no other. God had no other. There's no other way of doing it. Like he realized like
Doing what?
there's
Creating?
creation. Like that for our own benefit, he realized like I
But
could
make the lesson,
create.
you're still in this paradigm that this God had to create in the first place.
No, he
What if
didn't
there's
have
a
to.
real option on the table of not creating? You're assuming an omelet has to be made. No, I'm saying no.
I'm saying if you want the benefit of the omelet, you have to break some
Does
eggs. Like
does
there's no
the
there's
God
no
of the
other way of
universe
doing it.
need an omelet? Does the God of the
He doesn't.
universe
He no. He
want an
does. He.
omelet?
I guess like if you were an all perfect being, you could be in isolation forever. Or apparently, what happened at some moment, like
Oh, this is
whether
getting good.
yeah, well,
You're painting a picture right now of a God in isolation for eternity.
yeah.
Are you're almost making it sound like that's a bad thing.
Well, I think it's not. I think it's just if I think since God is like the concept is that He's all perfect, He would almost want to create more good, even if that came with some corresponding harm.
Okay, now listen to yourself. He would want to create more good. Is God all good?
Yes,
So would you say he's infinitely good?
I would say He's infinitely good. I mean,
But if we add just a little bit more goodness, it makes it better.
well, it's because it's it's like more whipped cream
Right.
on the
Like think
stick.
of a scale. Like you honestly think you can put God on one side of the scale, and by creating, it makes the scale like even heavier? Like no.
Well,
If unless you want to say God is again not all good, and he can increase the goodness of existence by creating, then you have to say, well, God's not all there then. He needs a little more good.
Yeah, well, I mean, now that I think of it, like, there are different levels of infinity. So you could have like he could be infinite, and then there could be even like infinity plus one.
Hey, man! This
Who's
makes
that?
sense!
Frank Turek is listening in, and he's agreeing with everything I'm saying.